Bum 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 bum.
Tomatoes?
Hello, and welcome to the video for what is a slate brush. This is a slate brush. It's actually a collection of data that we use to determine how we're going to show something inside the engine. Slate itself is the underlying user interface system for the engine itself, the editor that we can see here, and it drives the UMG or user interface system that we use to design our user interfaces. Now you may have actually already worked with slate brushes because if you have an image, you have a brush section under appearance. And these are slate brushes that you are creating individually. Now looking at the slate brushes, we have some data. At the bottom we have our preview. Now we're going to open this up a little bit so we can see it better. And we have some settings. What image, if any, is going to be displayed? The size, a tint, if any, how are we drawing it, and any margins based on how we're going to draw it. We're going to reset that back to default. And now we have our image that we're being shown. And by default, a little 32 by 32 unit item, white with a tint. We can change the size. Let's go with something like 128 by 128. And this is going to be the default size of our brush. Now we're showing nothing right now, and we're tinting it white. We can, of course, change it if we want to. We're going to leave it at white. I could swear we're going to leave it at white, but I guess not. There we go. Up here we have our image. Now our image doesn't necessarily have to be an image or a texture. Texture's down here. We have things like sprites, render targets, and materials that can be used as well. In this case, I'm going to go with a material called material background, which I think was backdrop actually. Here we go, material backdrop. Now the material backdrop is an image that I'm using here, and it's a material, and it's going to help us demonstrate how our different draw as works. Draw as image draws the image. It's just literally as simple as that. Here's an image. Here's the alignment we have set up for it. And this is the way it looks at 128 by 128. We can set tiling. For example, we set tiling both. Now, even though it's 128 by 120 image, if the way we want to draw it is bigger than that, it's going to go ahead and tile it both horizontally and vertically, or just vertically or just horizontally. Again, whatever you feel like. None is none. Well, it's just a blank draw as. That's simple enough. Box is going to be a box where the edges, the corners, are going to be fixed sizes and everything else is going to stretch. And we determine that by our margin. So here's our margin. This is the entire margin if you want to set it at once, or the individual sides. It's in percentage. So for example, 0 to 1 is 100%. If I want 25% to be my margin, I would do 0.25. So I'm going to do 0.25. You'll notice our corners now look like they're supposed to. They're 25% of our original image, and the rest is stretched based on our desired result. And these are useful if you want to do things like buttons, where you need something in the middle, maybe a solid color. Border is just like the box, except it's not going to draw the inside. You can see here we have our items, as we said here, our different margins. And you can see them adjusting as we're testing it. Let's reset this back to something a little more realistic like 0.2. And then you can see how the inside is not going to be drawing anything. That's what the border is for. That is the basics of our slate brushes. We define how we want it to look, and then we use it. And it's reusable because this item, this slate brush asset, is in our content browser. And now we can reuse it anytime we need to load up a brush. A common example would be in like an image here, as you can see. And there's a couple things here. We have slate brush assets. These are the items that exist on our system. And then we have the slate brush structure, which is the data that we are feeding into right here. So you'll notice, for example, if I grab our brush here, it's our slate brush, we'll grab the variable, and we try to plug it in, it's not going to go in. This expects a slate brush structure, or the data. This is our actual slate brush on the item itself, our asset. So we need to convert it. In that case, we can use a make brush from asset node, fill in our brush, plop it in here. We can go do something like this and save it. This is my pre-construct node, so you can actually see it show up inside of here. And of course, if we were to change this and resize it, so we didn't just resize it, we had this thing anchored to the middle. Let's say we resize it something like 500 by 500. You'll notice it's not really going to work because we had sized the content, so undo it. So there we go. Now you can see it's our border like we expected. And of course, we can adjust everything inside of here. You can see it basically is loading it up. The other option is we can see in here, so I'll go ahead and remove this binding, is we can bind using a function where we basically do the same thing we did in here. Make a brush from asset, fill it in, except it does it on the actual, it binds it to the variable itself and binds the settings. We're not doing it runtime, we're kind of doing it design time, and then when we run it, you can see it here. That's it. Those are your basics of what a slate brush is. It's a reusable asset inside the engine that can define data. That data is usually an image and certain settings such as tint and color and border type, how we want to look, and then we can load it up and reuse it as needed anywhere that we take in a brush.